Oh, great to see everybody. Welcome. Let's start our day with a nice prayer. Today I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment. A community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. Oh, just love that prayer. And so last week we did a teaching and a practice all week on the Four Noble Truths. And so Miss Ella requested, oh, Tarpa, you should go right into the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which is a way of cultivating and practicing them. And I thought, isn't that so true? I've complained in the past that when I was in the monasteries in India doing a formal curriculum, you just keep learning and learning, and they never give you time to practice anything. As soon as you're done with something, you just go right into the next subject. And you're thinking, gosh, when am I ever going to have time to study all these? I mean, sometimes, 10 to 21 years of studying all these various things. So we are not going to fall into that trouble. We are going to do it the right way. So I thought, wouldn't that be wonderful to go right into practicing the Four Noble Truths? So last week, what we did was we studied the Four Noble Truths, which means we got a conceptual idea, academic idea of what they are. We define them, explain them, that kind of thing. And then we actually did quite a bit of practice on it too. Each day of the week, through our insight meditation, we were practicing on the various aspects. But within Buddhism, there's kind of a formal way of practicing the Four Noble Truths. And I thought we'd share that today. It's really easy. Don't worry, everybody, about it. And it is another insight meditation, which is another very exciting thing. Rob and me were talking before we started recording. Um, Rob was saying that he was always practicing calm abiding because he thought insight meditation sounded complex and advanced, and he wasn't sure if he knew it. And then I told him, I said, no, it's the easiest thing in the world. Everybody kind of blows it out of proportion. That actually, insight meditation is a very, very easy technique. Easy to learn. It's questionable how easy it is to master, but I think that's also pretty easy. So he started practicing it this week, and he said, Tarpa, it was really cool. It was easy. I was able to do it. So that's really exciting. So we'll be using Rob's skills of insight meditation this week. So with that said, let's dive into the yummy goodness of today's teaching. And let me see if I can find it here on my screen, prepared as always. Oh, so this is a practice of how to cultivate the Four Noble Truths. If anybody wants to follow along or afterwards wants to read more about this, basically this is a presentation from my text, Tibetan Buddhist Essentials. This is found in volume 3. There's 3 volumes. This is volume 3, page 47. And it's a pretty straightforward Tibetan presentation of the 16 aspects and practicing them. So we begin cultivating an understanding of the Four Noble Truths through the use of the 3 great objectives. And if you remember the 3 great objectives, which we apply towards anything any concept we're engaged with in Buddhism, is the practice of study, contemplation, and meditation. So whatever it is that we run across, these are the 3 that we apply. First, study. In traditional Buddhism, this is translated as listening because, of course, in the early Buddhist teachings, it was an oral tradition. But generally, this is just any type of study, whether it's a classroom, reading books, listening to the teachings, all of those are considered study. And then contemplation. And contemplation means after that, after that class or listening to those teachings, you make yourself a big cup of coffee, you find a comfy chair to sit in, and you think about it, and you think, now what the heck did all of that mean? You try to put it in the context. You try to start to simplify it and turn it from knowledge into wisdom through its simplification. And then lastly, we take it to the cushion and we meditate on it. And when we talk about meditation here, we're talking about, of course, insight meditation. We take the theme or the ideas in, and of course, insight meditation is a form of contemplation meditation, where instead of trying to cease our thinking process, here we actively use the thinking process to gain insight and wisdom. And so that's what we're doing. Last week, we did the study and contemplation aspects, as well as we did some insight on it as well. But today we're going to dig right into the meditation aspect of it. So regarding this, the Buddha posited a unique aim for each of the Four Noble Truths. And so the Four Noble Truths were the truth of suffering, the truth of cessation, again, the truth of suffering. Number two, the truth of the cause. Three, the truth of cessation. And four, the truth of path. So the truth of suffering is, what is suffering? The truth of cause is, why do we suffer? The truth of cessation or ending is, how do we end our suffering? And the truth of the path is, what is the path leading from suffering? And the Buddha said each one of these has a unique aim. The first one, the truth of suffering, has the aim of sufferings are to be known, understood, right? The second, the truth of cause. Their causes are to be abandoned. And when we talk about the causes, we're talking about ignorance, attachment, and grasping. Number three, the truth of cessation. Their cessation is to be actualized. And that means that actually creating an experience of stillness leading towards nirvana. And fourth, the truth of path. The path is to be relied upon. So those are the four, and we're going to look again at those at the end. Ordinary practitioners are said to practice the Four Noble Truths, whereas superior beings are said to directly realize them, meaning they have fully realized suffering, completely abandoned the causes, and perfectly actualized cessation by thoroughly cultivating the path. I'd like to repeat that. They have fully realized suffering, completely abandoned the causes, perfectly actualized cessation, and thoroughly cultivated the path. And that's what we're going to attempt to do. That's what we're trying to do here. So the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, which are found in both Theravada and Mahayana teachings, are comprised of four characteristics that counteract four what they call distortion concepts pertaining to each truth, or four misinformations, four types of ignorance. These characteristics are studied, contemplated, and meditated upon in order to gain a deeper understanding of their meaning. And how about if I put this on screen for everybody so you can watch along with me? There we go. I found it. So these are pretty straightforward, and these are concepts that we've all studied previously in one form or another in our classes. So let's just kind of go through them. So with each truth, the first one is the truth of suffering. There's four aspects to contemplate, to study, contemplate, and meditate on. The first one is impermanence. We studied this a while back. I like to just use the word change. Impermanence is the idea that that one's aggregates are impermanent, undergoing continuous momentary rising and disintegration. And impermanence in Buddhism doesn't mean everlasting. Impermanence means that that it exists in a state of constant change. So if you hold an apple in your hand, the apple, even though you can't see it, is gently decaying right there before your eyes. And you come back a couple of days later, of course, you see it. So I like to think of impermanence as just the universal principle of change, that all things are in a constant state of change. The next one is suffering itself, that one's aggregates, the components that make up ourselves, are the nature of suffering because they are under the influence of karma and afflictions. So again, like the apple, our body is in a state of decay. It's always changing, and it's impermanent. The third is emptiness, or we could call this also selflessness. This is a big topic we don't have time to really get into. We've talked about it before, but the idea that one's aggregates are empty because of not being permanent, unitary, or an independent self. In other words, when we say empty, uh, we don't mean non-existent. We mean lacking something. And when we say that we're empty or selfless, it means that we're lacking any kind of concrete aspect, like a soul inside us that that solidifies our existence and um, makes us substantial or kind of concrete. The idea of emptiness is that we exist in a very ethereal way. We exist in a much different way than we think we do. We exist more as an idea, conceptual construct. Um, the next one is selflessness. So that one's aggregates are selfless because they lack a self-sufficient, substantial existent self. So I just made my first mistake. I added the two together. So selfless here is what the definition I just gave you was, that one's aggregates are selfless because they lack self-sufficient, substantial self-existence, right? Meaning that we're not one thing. We exist because of parts and causes and conditions. We're a dependent thing. We exist through many different causes and conditions and parts. We're not a single thing in itself. And coming back to emptiness, the idea that one's aggregates are empty because of being because of not being permanent, unitary, and independent. So emptiness here means because we are dependent. We call it dependent origination in Buddhism, that all things are made up of other things. No matter what it is, the things don't exist singularly on their own. Everything exists as parts of other things. So those are what those last two are. I hope I made that clear to everyone. You can ask questions about that in the Q&A. The second one is the truth of the cause. So the first is cause, that ignorance and afflictions are the cause of suffering, through which delusions, attachment, and aversions arise. So that's the cause of our suffering generally. The next one is origin. Where does the cause arise from? That ignorance and afflictions are the origin of suffering, through which suffering continuously arises again and again. Three is strong production, that ignorance and affliction possess a great force which produces strong suffering. So I think that that's clear enough. Conditions, that attachment is the condition that allows ignorance to give rise to all the suffering, all its suffering results. Oftentimes they use the word attachment in Buddhism. I like to use the word grasping. I think maybe attachment in modern language is a little bit different. I mean, what is attachment? It's to grasp something. So I could see the two terms being synonymous, but oftentimes attachment is also the positive aspects of attachment, like love and like friendship. And it just means, for me, attachment means a draw to an object, right? Where grasping, where the draw to an object, like friendship in itself, doesn't necessarily cause strong suffering, but then to grasp onto that and become needy is where the really suffering comes in. So that point is up for debate. Oftentimes, when we talk about the cause of suffering, different schools posit different things. Tibetan Buddhism always posits ignorance. Sometimes Theravada Buddhism likes to say desire. Other schools like to talk about attachment. And I think in a lot of ways, attachment and desire seem synonymous. So I'm afraid on that, it's a bit of a language semantics, and you just have to decide for yourself what language kind of makes that clear to you. Again, I like the term grasping. It's not that we like things or we're attached to a chocolate ice cream. It's when you have to have it at all costs where trouble comes in, right? Let's move on to the next one, the truth of cessation. And cessation means ending, the truth of the ending of suffering, which is nirvana. The first is cessation itself, that liberation is the cessation of suffering, because once suffering has been abandoned, it is no longer produced. Pacification, that liberation is peace and the pacification of all ignorance, delusion, attachment, aversion, and afflictions. And you probably recognize that from the Four Seals. What the third of the Four Seals is nirvana is peace, right? Superb, that liberation is the supreme source of benefit and happiness because there is nothing higher, there is nothing better than liberation. And the last one, definite emergence, which is a funny term, but when you understand it, it's a pretty good term. It means generally renunciation, the wish for freedom. That liberation is the total irreversible release from samsara. Definite emergence. Emergence means to emerge out of, to rise out of samsara. And definite means to have your mind made up. I am making up my mind that I want freedom, I want liberation, and I don't want to suffer anymore. That's one of mine. And the last is the truth of path. So our first one is path, that the wisdom directly realizing selflessness or emptiness is a true path because it leads to liberation. Now, that one, you might say, well, doesn't that take an element of belief? And I would say, no, it doesn't, because you don't have to experience it fully to know its truth. You can experience it in small ways. We talk about the path being incremental. And as you start to understand the concept of selflessness and emptiness, and you can apply it to your life, meaning you learn how to have a little bit of objective distance, and you can abide in stillness, and you're able to just have a little bit of distance between you and the troubles of your life. And you see, wow, that's quite liberating. There's a lot of space there for me to breathe and make decisions. Right there is a taste of it. So you don't have to be a Buddha to say that this is accurate. And most of the things in Buddhism work like this. You can get a taste of them in your practice. And then as you practice, you get deeper and deeper tastes, and you just know they're true. For me, there's no doubt in my mind, when we talk about this kind of liberation, when we talk about stillness and objective distance, boy, almost all suffering just falls away when you're in that state. That is the state to be in. I wish I could remain in that state for all day long. I keep trying to increase my percentage. I think I'm up to 60%, but I'm trying. So we're all moving in that direction. Our next one is awareness, that wisdom directly realizing selflessness or emptiness is the antidote to afflictions. And it is, that awareness, understanding your anger, being aware of it, seeing it as it arises, understanding the antidote to apply, right? That mindfulness, that awareness really is the very first step to it, to finding a remedy for it, or to ending your affliction from it. So you remember I'm sorry, my mind's a little squirrely today. The four gifts practice. We talk about the first thing to realizing each of the gifts of stability, calm, caring, and happiness, is to first have the awareness that this is an important quality and it's something I want, right? That is the very first step in anything we do. Realizing the benefit, knowing that it's something you want to do, and being able to turn your awareness or your mindfulness in that direction to cultivate that wish. Achievement, that wisdom directly realizing selflessness or emptiness, is achievement because it directly realizes the nature of the mind. It's something that can be achieved, right? It's an attainment. Um, and deliverance, that wisdom directly realizing selflessness or emptiness, is deliverance because it brings irreversible liberation. So, in our group, we often have problems with this absolute language. Tibetans see things in a very absolute way, and they say, no, it's complete and utter irreversible liberation from all suffering of any kind and any. And I'm thinking, oh, what does that mean? You never get a bee sting the rest of your life, or you never have a toothache, or a student doesn't disappoint you, or you see somebody fall down and hurt themselves and you feel nothing. I can't go along with that. I don't think I'd be a human being if I no longer suffered anymore. Doesn't that mean you'd lack all empathy and all compassion, right? So we have a problem with that one. So we go into percentages. So it's deliverance because it brings over 75% reduction in suffering. We say something like that. That's kind of silly. Yeah. So those are the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, four aspects of each one. And so when we talk about how we apply this is study, contemplation, and meditation. So unfortunately, we don't have 16 days in our daily insight meditations. So I'm thinking that we'll do these in 4 days. So tomorrow, or yeah, starting tomorrow, um, we'll do the first one, the truth of suffering. And then what I want you guys to do is reread this from the text. Remember, the text it's a free download from tenzintarpa.com, so you can't complain. Um, and what we want to do is just read over the first one, read again what impermanence is, suffering, emptiness, selflessness, get an idea what that is, sit back, contemplate it. Now, what do those things really mean? And then in your insight meditation, just kind of unleash the four and see which one you're kind of drawn to. If you're really moved by this practice, you can continue it even after this week goes, and you can contemplate through them all. You'll find that the four are interrelated. So for me, I'm not really meditating on each four. I'm meditating on suffering, and I'm realizing that suffering has four components. Maybe that helps, right? So for tomorrow, what you're really meditating on again is like we did last week. The first one is suffering, but here you're going to bring these four aspects of suffering in and see how they're interdependent. And then the same thing with the next one, the truth of cause, is understanding why we suffer. And these are four aspects to why we suffer: the truth of cessation, the truth of leaving samsara and entering nirvana. Again, we have four aspects of that cessation. And, and then we have truth of path, four aspects of the path, right? And so that's easier to think about than to meditate on each one of those independently. But you're free to do it any way you want. It's just fine. And don't feel like you have to get them all down. This is a heck of a practice. I've never heard of anybody doing a retreat on this, or somebody getting this as a practice to take into retreat and spend a month on or something. I mean, we do a 1 year Lamrim, but I don't think the Lamrim does the Four Noble Truths in it. I haven't looked over the Lamrim for a while now. That's one of the great Tibetan Buddhist texts, the Lamrim Chenmo, and it's a Gelug school text by the great Tsongkhapa. But I'm pretty sure that the 16 aspects aren't in there. What do you think, Carl? You have the 16 aspects in there? Have you run across it lately? Been ages since
Yeah,
I
they
went.
are. They're in the Lamrim Chemo. Yeah.
The 16 aspects, huh?
Yeah, they're in there.
Lovely. And I'm guessing the 31 aspects of awakening just generally are in there, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, Chenna Dorje has spoken, and unless you want a bloody nose, you do not question Chenna Dorje. Chenna Dorje, they say in real life, was the Buddha's protector, his bodyguard. And so I gave Carl that name just for that reason. So when we start doing outdoor festivals, he can hover over me and make sure people don't attack me. Hey, I think
The
that's about
club
it.
in my
Kind of
right
a
hand.
yeah, club in your right hand, sandwich in your left. Yeah. So I think that's about it today. That's a short teaching. Why don't we open the floor to my low one thing I remember. Let's now go back and look at these one more time. Suffering is to be known, right? We have to understand it in our bones. This is what the Buddha is telling us. It's not just, yeah, you're right. Sometimes I'm not so happy. This is understanding suffering at the deepest level, understanding existential suffering that in one way or another, most of my life is somehow unsatisfactory, even at times where it seems like I should be really happy, you know. That doesn't negate happiness. Of course we're happy. Of course we experience great levels of happiness. I know I do. I'm happy all the time. But the fact is that existence itself is traumatic and difficult, and there's great suffering. And maybe it's not true for everybody. Maybe some of us are lucky and live very privileged lives and we don't suffer too much. We're still suffering. But for most people out there, life is really hard to get through. And just getting to the ending, boy, that's what all of us are trying to get to, right? And if life was so great, why do we have such high suicide rates? And so I think, logically, you can look at this one. Clearly, life is difficult, right? For many people. And then, so suffering is to be known. To escape suffering, the first thing is you really got to know what it is. You got to know what it is, why you want to get away from it, and then imagine what it would be like to not be in it anymore. I'm getting ahead of myself. The second one, their causes are to be abandoned. So we're talking about attachment, grasping, ignorance. In a sense, we're talking about overreaction, right? Reactionary behavior. That's what we're really talking about. That we just grasp onto everything around us, and everything is so important and so immediate, and we live in this exaggerated state of reality, which is called samsara, right? So when we learn how to abandon this grasping and attachment and grasping at desire, we learn how to calm down and we can abide in stillness. And this is a lovely thing. The third one, their cessation is to be actualized, which means uh, to really escape reactive behavior completely, right? I think that these four is where Batchelor really gets his four, what does he call them again? The four chores, the four tasks. He calls it the four tasks. This must be exactly where he gets it from because they're almost word for word the same. And then number four, the path is to be relied upon. So yeah, and Batchelor kind of presents it in an interesting way. I think how he presents it is the first is suffering are to be known, understanding suffering. And then the second one um, is learning how uh, to move away from reactive behavior. And to him, he says, this is what nirvana is, to abandon reactive behavior and to exist in a state of stillness. And which is again the second one, to abandon all of those things. But I remember, the path comes first, right? Through the path, we understand suffering, we learn how to abandon it, and to stop reactionary behavior from coming up. Anyway, something like that. I did a terrible job. He's going to be terribly mad at me for that. And then, secondly, we have this idea that um, realize suffering, fully realize suffering, the first one, completely abandon the causes, the second one, perfectly actualize cessation, the third, and thoroughly cultivate the path, right? That's absolutely lovely, isn't it? I found that to be really profound when I was younger and I ran across that for the first time. That line really meant a lot to me. That ordinary practitioners are said to practice these truths, whereas superior beings are said to directly realize them. And they say that that's the point where the Buddha became a Buddha, when he had a direct realization. So that means it wasn't a conceptual idea. He felt it in his bones. He directly realized it. He had an experience of that, that he knew it's so true. He had that aha moment, meaning that he had fully realized suffering, completely abandoned the causes, and perfectly actualized cessation by thoroughly cultivating the path. So I think that that's absolutely lovely. With that said, let's get to some questions. You guys got any questions about the 16 aspects? And I'm hoping you do, because I don't have much more material than that. Who's been practicing the insight meditations on the Four Noble Truths this week? Has anybody? Good, good. Oh, excellent. Everybody. Me too. I have. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. And every time I do, it just gets deeper and deeper. Every time I contemplate the Four Noble Truths, I get something more out of it. After 30 years, you'd think that, you'd get everything there was. I would have milked that thing by now, but still keeps producing, man. My understanding of it always
That
becomes deeper and deeper.
the first group of four,
Yeah.
on the four listed under suffering. I mean, you could get years worth of material just out of impermanence and emptiness. I mean, suffering and selflessness are sort of self-explanatory, but impermanence and emptiness, those will take you through some rabbit holes.
Yeah, and of course, we just studied these under the Four Seals just a couple weeks ago.
Right.
So you ain't kidding. They're very profound, very deep. And I would say the same is true for the others. The second one, the truth of the cause, to really get your mind around how we suffer is intense, especially origin. So in Tibetan Buddhism, the origin, you just keep going deeper and deeper until you get to the real root. And the real root is grounded in ignorance of our identity, right? We often say in Buddhism, what we truly are is an identity. That's how we exist, um, imputed upon a body and mind. Of course, we have a body. Of course, we have a mind. But really, what we think of ourselves is an identity, and so uh, the suffering is caused by our grasping at wrong views of that identity. That somehow we think that we exist more than an identity. We believe that we're self-actualized. Yeah. And that's where notions like soul and things come in. There has to be an aspect of me that carries on. There has to be something more to me than just that. And the Buddha said, hey, sorry, that's it, man. But what's interesting, I believe, is that when you start to really understand the Buddhist teachings on selflessness, for me at least, all of a sudden a great positiveness came from it. And the idea was, all of a sudden I realized that the Buddha wasn't giving us bad news and saying, sorry, uh, you're not as substantial as you think you are, which sounds like bad news to most people. Most people want to be substantial. No, I exist. I'm here. Look at me. Look at me. We don't like the idea of being invisible, but the Buddha's model of our existence is actually quite astounding. He's telling us that we exist in a much more miraculous way than we think we do, that we're so much more wondrous than we think we do. It seems like we want to see ourselves as kind of a very basic form of organism, like we're just a little better than rocks and trees, where the Buddha's painting a picture of us as just absolutely remarkable the way we exist. So at some point, this great positivity came from the teachings on it. And I started to realize the true miracle of my existence and the miracle or the wonder in the way the Buddha posits that we really exist, that human beings are just extraordinary beings. Down the rabbit hole. And then, of course, the truth of cessation. Now, this one, I think the wording is hard for people to get, and I apologize. In this text, I was really trying to be true to Tibetan Buddhism's take, so I was stuck using the language from the monastery. But this one is just that nirvana exists. This is the truth of nirvana. And one of the reasons they use this language is the Buddha loved to define nirvana simply as the lack of samsara. When you say, oh, what is this wonderful mental state that you've achieved? Well, I've gotten rid of samsara, which means I've gotten rid of my exaggerated views and ignorance and all the garbage that comes along with it, all the minutia of emotional baggage that we carry around every single day. People are always trying to figure out what samsara is. Samsara is really that. It's just this giant bag of emotional and mental stuff we carry that we can't seem to get rid of. That's what samsara is. Every aspect you don't like about yourself, that's samsara. That whole big bag, especially the ones where you don't love yourself, you don't care about yourself. Because once you set that bag down, or once you realize your true nature, like we just talked about, that you're this wondrous being that you are, then you can't help but just be blown away by it and living in a state of incredible appreciation. And from that moment on, you're reborn. Your self-hatred doesn't exist anymore. Every day is just a blessing. You can't believe how fortunate you are to be alive. So that's what this one is, the truth of nirvana, that liberation yeah, the liberation we're talking about is nirvana, right? And nirvana is a state that no longer produces suffering. Now, I would say that that's true. A minute ago we said, well, we don't like this absolute idea of not suffering anymore. That's different than saying nirvana doesn't produce suffering, because we're talking about nirvana and samsara are two mental states. They're two ways of their views and perspectives of the way we look at the world. They're two mental. One's a healthy mental state, and samsara is an unhealthy mental state. Nirvana itself does no longer produce suffering, but my point is that you're still well aware of the suffering of other people, which makes you suffer as well, right? But nirvana itself doesn't produce suffering. I would agree with that completely. You no longer have all that baggage that continues to produce agony in your life. Those negative memories of when you were younger and embarrassed or you did something bad, they just don't arise anymore. The mind, you're in complete control of the mind. and that nirvana is peace and purification and pacification of all those horrible qualities. And superb, that nirvana is superb and definite emergence. That nirvana is a total irreversible release from your own samsara. Let's say that. But when you're released from samsara, you still have to exist in everybody else's, don't you? You know, you're still stuck there, and sometimes that's agonizing, right? It's like sometimes the more I work on my own mind, the more I notice how everybody else seems to have a long way to go. Anybody else feel that way? Yeah. Lovely. Jenna Dorje.
Yeah, I think the Buddha felt that way too. What's his name? The philosopher Sartre once said, "Hell is other people."
Yeah, sure it
And
is.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, because even the Buddha, who's a perfectly awakened, enlightened being, the people around him could make his life exceedingly difficult, whether it was students of his and his followers who just did not understand what he was saying and kept getting it wrong, or people that were deliberately trying to interfere with him, or up to and including very well-intentioned people who were trying to do something nice that ended up hurting him. Um, yeah, we do still have to deal with the real world, even if we can escape all the other stuff internally. It's that's a really cool thing. But yeah, it's we. I like the way you said that. We still have to live in other people's samsara.
Well said, Carl. It's absolutely true. And then, there's the story that there's a lot of Buddhas who decide not to teach. Like they achieve enlightenment and they just say, "Oh man, heck with everybody else. I'm going to sit underneath the mango tree and just wait till I die and I never have to come back again." So, yeah, there's a lot, there's a lot of truth to that. I agree. And yes, we always have to deal with other people's samsara and their karma. But because we're lovely human beings and we're so compassionate, we say, "Oh, that's okay. We're gonna have a big raft and see we can paddle everybody across the stream to liberation." So that's what our sangha is doing. We're doing the best we can to paddle everybody. I know Tara's in the back kicking to help go guide the way. She's kicking to get the boat across faster. Everybody's trying. Everybody's on the sides pushing with their hands. We're all moving in that direction. Ah, lovely. So, a wonderful thing to do. Tomorrow I'll post something on our channel. And for all of those out there in TV land, we have a few different media sources. We have a WhatsApp group, and we have a Facebook group, and you can follow the practices and practice along with us on those. You can find the addresses for those on our website, tenzintharpa.com. And on that note, I'm going to stop the recording, and Sangha, we can stick around and talk a little bit more, talk about some other pressing things. Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. Whoops, wrong button.